you. Is my mic working? We didn't do a sound check. Thank you, Julie Sue, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for the opportunity to share this beautiful space with you today. It's quite an honor and a pleasure. Now, one of the first things I want to make clear, a little housekeeping issue, I'm on the board of directors of GLAAD, but I don't speak for GLAAD. We hire professional people who do that. And I also, as a captain of the Columbus Division of Fire, I don't speak for the City of Columbus or the Division of Fire. Having said that, I am very proud and honored to be aligned with both of those wonderful organizations. I speak highly all the time of both. I've got some handouts from GLAAD on your chairs and a little refrigerator magnet. So how does a fire captain in Central Ohio intersect with the National Board of Directors of GLAAD? And for those of you, does everyone know what who GLAAD is or what we do? Well, one of the reasons I really love this space that's been created is it's got purple, which is my favorite color, and which we at GLAAD use for Spirit Day, which is a very important event coming up, and then of course the red for fire. So this is perfect. I love it. Way back in 2011, there was a horrific event in New York City. Some of you may or may not remember from history, but it was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And in that fire, there were 146 people who perished, most of them women between the ages of 13 and 23 who were laborers. And they were locked in because they were afraid that they might steal some of the factory's fabrics or whatever. And prior to that time, there were no fire prevention codes. The city of New York, nor any other fire department that I know of, really focused a lot on fire prevention. We just ran to the fire and put it out. And 5 years before that, Upton Sinclair wrote the book, The Jungle, which highlighted the plight of the meatpacker factory, which stirred a lot of interest, but not in the workers' rights, in the worker safety, but in health and food safety. So it was after the Triangle T-shirt or shirtwaist factory fire, when all these women perished, that people finally decided to form the Factory Commission of 1911, which led to lots of labor improvements and fire prevention codes. And so one of the things we do in fire prevention, besides just writing statutes and codes for people to follow, is we do a lot of education. You know, we teach children how to stop, drop, and roll if, heaven forbid, their clothes should ever catch on fire. We teach people the importance of having a fire safety plan. We teach people, you know, how to have fire safety in their homes and kitchens and put out grease fires. Anyways, we do a lot of education and prevention. So one of the ways that I think what I bring to GLAAD as a firefighter is that sense of prevention, and that's what GLAAD is all about. So similar to the 1911 tragedy there in the 1980s was the AIDS epidemic, and there was a need. There was a lot of misinformation being put out to the general population about LGBT people, and that's when GLAAD was formed, to help see that LGBT people's stories and news items and the depiction in the media was done fairly and accurately, so that seeing us as human beings and getting to know our stories, it's harder to hate someone whose story you know. And that's what we do at GLAAD, which I am so passionate about because it's the precursor to change. I mean, we have a lot of organizations that do great work on the local, state, national, and international levels. But if you haven't worked on changing people's hearts and minds, it's harder to get those laws and things passed. And so the work that GLAAD does is, a lot of it's, just like with fire prevention work, a lot of it's not seen, but they're both saving lives. There's a ripple effect from the things that we do. And so with that, I will segue into telling you a little bit about my story. This is a picture of me at the firehouse, and this was taken. A mother brought her 2 children to come and see me, and this picture was taken. So again, being a firefighter is a lot more than rushing into flames. We do a lot of EMS, we do a lot of community relations. I came on the fire division in 1981 as 3rd-generation firefighter, following in my father's footsteps. My grandfather came on in 1920, and my father in 1947. And my brother was also a firefighter on the Rickenbacker Fire Division, and my dad had an uncle. So I was happy to follow in that family tradition. Part of that, when you hear the stories of lots of trans women, you will hear that they gravitate towards very macho, male types of vocations. And part of that is trying, and for me at least, and I want to back up for a second. As I tell my story, as a trans woman, as a trans person, a very important point I want to bring up is that it's my story. It's one way to be trans. Everybody in here is unique. We're all snowflakes. There's not one other person like us. And I think human nature, a lot of times, when we don't understand something, the first thing we try to do is associate it with something that we do understand, oftentimes with ourselves or other people. So I've had to fight the bad habit of figuring out what does trans mean, or what is transness for myself, and then overlaying that onto other people who identify as trans. Because I often say there's as many ways to be trans as there is to be human. So this is my path, and every other trans person is on a slightly different path, but that doesn't mean they're lost, doesn't mean I'm lost. You know, we're all struggling just to be who we are and to be accepted for who we are. And if I'm free, if Julie Sue is free to be who she is, then we're all more free to be who we are. Society puts a lot of, I think, artificial constraints on who we should be based on what we look like, or where we come from, or the color of our skin. And it's not right. And if we want to evolve as human beings, we need to get past some of these backwards ways of putting people in boxes and trying to define people and not letting them self-define who they are. And so let me back way up to it all started at St. Anne's Hospital when my mom gave birth to twin babies. And the doctor said, "Congratulations, it's a boy." Whoops, there's another one. "Congratulations, it's a girl." And so from that point on, my mother, with her 2 youngest of 5, had a boy and a girl, so she thought. But nobody bothered to ask me. They just went by what the doctor said and what the anatomy was. And so I grew up, from my earliest recollections, feeling a little sad inside. I wanted to be like my twin. I rationalized, as any child might make sense of it, that, apparently one of us was going to be a boy and one was going to be a girl. I guess I got the shaft. So I really was kind of inside, a little sad about it. And I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s, and there wasn't any examples of people like me on TV. There just wasn't. It wasn't until I think in the 70s I became aware of Christine Jorgensen, and I saw her. I stayed up late to watch her on Tom Snyder, and she was wonderful, but she was an old lady. She wasn't a child, struggling with identity like me, and there was only one. And then I became aware of Renee Richards, and then I started to see negative portrayals in television shows, and people were getting arrested for it. On Barney Miller, they arrested a male who was out dressed as a woman, and I thought, am I doing something against the law? So throughout my life, I always thought that the next milestone in my life, this burden, this struggle, internal struggle would be gone. And, I thought when I turned 10, this will all go away and I'll be like the rest of the boys. And it didn't. So I thought, well, I'm not a teenager yet. So 13, that's when it's all going to go away. I'm going to quit obsessing about, not feeling right as a boy and wanting to be a girl. Well, I became a teenager and that didn't go away. It'd go away for periods of time. I kind of delved into Little League and had some fun with that. But whenever the coach pulled me out of the game, I would cry, and the other kids would bully me for that and harass me for it. It was quite sadly, and I think back, I tried so hard because I knew I was going to cry. There were 2 second base men. And I only got to play half the game. So even though I knew it was coming, I'd start to cry. And boys don't cry. And I actually trained myself not to cry. And from that point on, I didn't cry very much. I'm starting to cry now. But that was part of that cycle of living a life that you don't get to be who you really are. And it just seems so unfair. Because it seems like most people get to do that. Most people take it for granted, having your gender, your sex match your gender identity inside. Most people don't have that struggle. It's hard for them to have empathy for something. I often said it would be like someone coming up to me and say, I feel like I need to have a third arm coming out my back. I would be like, that's crazy. I don't understand it. Or an eye on your forehead or something. And that's what it must be like. I try to empathize with people who aren't trans. How must it be to try and understand? So anyways, I moved forward. I got married. That didn't make it go away. I was deeply in love, still love her to this day. She's wonderful. We're no longer married. More about that later, maybe, if I have time. Then she did support, she knew. Before we got married, she knew, and she found my clothes. We went to counseling together, became part of a local transgender support group. And we would have little social gatherings where we could be who we are. There were wives there. I started to think, I really need to transition. This is who I am. And at that point, I had been bugging her about having children. And at that point, right before I was going to tell her, I don't know, I always thought maybe she knew. She said, okay, let's have children. You talk about an internal tug of war, because as much as I wanted to be Lana, who I am, and that was the name I had been using even back then, and that was in the late 1980s, I deeply wanted to be a parent. and I felt like I was supposed to be a parent. And that's part of what helped me not go down the road of transition maybe as a teenager. Of course, in the 1970s, there's still, that didn't seem like it's something that was even possible for, some regular person in Columbus, Ohio, son of a firefighter. It just didn't seem in the cards for me. Plus, I always used to compare myself to my twin sister, and at age 15, I grew 1.5 feet. My hands got big, and I compared myself to her. We look a lot alike, but she's a more smaller, petite version of me. I'm a larger version of her, I guess. So I thought that it wouldn't be possible. I've come to find out as my life goes on that a lot of things are possible that we don't think are possible, and life is full of surprises. So I had children. I got wonderful children. And I came out to my wife, and part of the catalyst for that was my children were growing up, and we had a wonderful relationship, but they didn't know who I was. They only knew part of me. They didn't know, I just couldn't go any farther without my kids knowing who I am. And the more I thought about it, I thought not only do I have to be true to them, I have to be true to myself. And I need to transition and be the best version of me that I can be. And that's the lesson I wanted them to teach. Although a lot of people, a lot of naysayers, a lot of people who weren't so supportive, though they didn't say it to my face, I found out through the grapevine, they were like, well, we don't care what he's doing, but we don't like what he's doing to his kids. What they didn't know is they were only seeing the tip of the iceberg. They saw the perfect family. We were. We had a nice home, nice jobs, beautiful kids, active in our church. So that to most people, that's the alternative to what I was doing. They didn't know what was beneath the surface. So how could they, first of all, they shouldn't have been judging me. Second of all, how could I take offense at somebody's judgment of me if they didn't have all the evidence? So, it's like they say, when people judge other people and they say negative or nasty things, it's really saying more about them than it is about the person that they're criticizing. It really is. It's more reflective of that. So I didn't let that bother me because I knew deep in my heart, I knew my kids, and I knew that even though this was going to be very difficult and shatter their world for a period of time, on the other side, they would be better people, and they would have grown from it. And that was my hope, and that was my faith. I didn't know if it was going to be 2 years or 20 years. And sadly, I know a lot of people whose families, reject them, and they still hold out hope. I was very fortunate that it only took a couple years, and my daughter came to me. She sent me a text after several months with no communication. She sent me a text, and she said, Dad, I hope, they still call me Dad, and I'm okay with that. Because I don't want them calling anyone else Dad, because that's me. My son stood up we did a presentation once, and he said, my dad told me, one thing my dad said, or she said this, after calling me Dad, and everybody laughed, but that's the way it is. They are proud of their father, who is a woman. So it's the new normal, I guess, or at least hopefully what we're working towards. But I swayed there a little bit. Where was I? Anyhow, I want to start moving on. So this woman brings her children to see me at the firehouse, and we have a wonderful time. I showed them the fire trucks and stuff. And she brought them to the firehouse for a reason. She brought them to the firehouse because she had heard about me through a mutual friend. She lives not far away, and – 1 of her children is trans. and she wanted her child to meet a real-life trans adult because she wanted her child to know that she had a future. So this is something I didn't have, and I'm very happy to be an inspiration for families with trans children. And I know there's a lot of pushback from mainstream society, and I just think that's because they don't understand. I think if they would meet a trans child, they'd know it's more. People like to say, "Oh, it's a phase." You know, I'm a man and I used to play with dolls, but it's different. Trust me, it's different than that. And when a mother knows their child, and when, thankfully, children these days, there's enough out there that they do see that they're not the only one, and they are speaking up, saying things to their parents. And unlike people of my generation, the parents are now more enlightened, and they recognize it, and they get a chance to transition and maybe be who they are at a much younger age. And sometimes I envy the younger ones who get to not go through as many years feeling like they're in a prison like I was. But at the same time, I can't wish away my kids. If I would have transitioned like I started to when I was going to tell my wife before she said, let's have kids, and my children wouldn't be here. My daughter's 20, she'll be 24 here in August, and my son just turned 20. And they both say that they're better people for having gone through what our family went through. And I'm so proud of both of them. And they're both kind, and they're empathetic, and they're accepting of people that are different from themselves. And I don't think you can ask for much more than that. And by the way, in case you're wondering, which one is trans? It's the little girl. This mother was told that her daughter was a boy when she was born. But as you can see, she's not. One of the things I wanted to speak about was community. The whole trans community. I didn't want to talk the whole morning about myself, even though I know it's important that we each tell our individual stories, though I don't speak for all trans people or all LGBTQI people. I did want to share some startling statistics because I'm blessed. I had a family that loved me and was willing to empathize and support me, even though it was very difficult. I had an employer with the city of Columbus who supported me. I was talking to Jay earlier, and I was going to just retire early and transition. And that was in 2008, and I remember being in the fire truck coming back from a run, thinking about it, and I thought, I love this job. I'm good at this job. I shouldn't have to leave a job that I've worked so hard at for so many years, a family tradition, just to be who I am. And even if I retire early and go off and do it, they're going to find out. And what kind of message does that send to my fire family? It sends the message that being who you are, or at least in my case, being who I am, is something to be ashamed of, something that I couldn't look them in the eye. And I just decided I'm not going to do that. And I had written about this before, and Jay mentioned that it spoke to him. But I realized I owed them that chance to accept me. I couldn't just automatically assume that they would reject me. Even though I was like, this is the fire department. This is firehouse. I know these guys. And people say, how could you transition in a firehouse with firefighters? It's so macho. And I just kind of off the top of my head said, well, I think macho is an act. I mean, we're all actors. Life is a stage, right? We're all performing at some level. We all have different ego states throughout our daily lives. But as it turned out, through some of the friends on the fire department, I mean, I got overwhelming support. Overwhelmed. But beyond, I thought, well, if I get 10, there's 1,500 members in the fire division. And I thought, even if 10% hate my guts and harass me, that's 150 people. I don't know. I don't know if I can do this. And what about all the other fire departments that we work with? And they came through. They stepped up and they treated me like a human being. In fact, I was told that at the executive board of my local union, they were at the first meeting after I came out, someone kind of sarcastically said, what are we going to do about Captain Moore? And my union president, Jack Reel, stood up and said, what do you mean, what are we going to do? She's a human being. She's our sister. We're going to treat her as such. They all followed. Because see, that's what leaders do. Leaders lead from the front. They get out there. And it's scary. It's not always easy. And I have friends in the fire department who say, Lana, everybody speaks kindly of you. They say, and it's the leaders. The leaders all speak kindly of you and admire you. And everyone follows. They said, it's the guys, maybe not so much, that are making the jokes and stuff. So, anyhow, I'm blessed, beyond words. But that's not, as I said earlier, that's one story. It's not the story of your average, typical trans person, especially because, let's face it, when I transitioned, age 48 when I transitioned, it's almost 4 complete decades of white male privilege, right? So I had a good job. I had the money to do the things I wanted to do. That's not the case now. We have younger, like I spoke of with the children and teenagers and people in their 20s, they're transitioning. They don't have those resources. And I'm here to tell you, when you talk about privilege, I didn't realize what male privilege was until I lost it. And I keep trying to explain that to my brother and some of my brothers at the firehouse. They're just blind to it. And I was. And I've lost male privilege, but I still have white privilege. And so I don't know what it's like to be black. I don't. But at least now my eyes are opened. I can empathize. I can sort of see it. I'm not going to claim to know it, but I recognize it now. And I try to speak to that a lot. And I'll speak a little bit more about that when I get to the heading diversity. But right now, back to trans. A recent Pew poll, 90% of Americans, when asked, would say that they personally know someone who is gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Conversely, only 8% of Americans will raise their hand when asked if they personally know a trans person. In 2013, 72% of LGBT homicide victims were transgender women. It was actually 13, I believe. Trans people experience unemployment at alarming rates, 4 times that the national unemployment rate. 90%, that's 90% report harassment, mistreatment on the job. Again, I'm one of the lucky 10%. I've gotten a little bit, but nothing to complain about. 53% of transgender people disrespected in a place of public accommodation. And we have a long way to go. There seems to be this notion that trans people are fair game to be laughed at, ridiculed. "41% of trans people will report that they've thought about or attempted to commit suicide." That's almost half. I know someone who recently told me that her counselor has an adage that she says if a trans person says that they haven't thought about suicide, they're lying. I've thought about it. I at one point, at one of my lowest points, was having death fantasies. I would just fantasize about being killed on the job, being in a car wreck, something like that. I don't know how that S got on there. That doesn't belong at the end of transgenders. By the way, transgender is an adjective. It's not a noun and it's not a verb, according to Lana More. So, anyhow, those are startling statistics. As I said, in 2014, last year, 13 trans women were murdered. All but 2 of them were either of color, black women, or Latina. These are the trans women who have been murdered so far this year, and we're only halfway through 2015. Poppy Edwards, Lamia Beard, Ty Underwood, Yasmin Bashpain, Taja Gabrielle De Jesus, Penny Proud, Christina Gomez Greenwald, London Chanel, Mercedes Williamson, India Clark, and this is just in the last couple weeks, India Clark and Casey Haggard. Casey Haggard was murdered. She was called over to a car and stabbed in the neck, and it was captured on security video. It's online, you can watch it. People came up and looked at her and walked away. It's a trans woman. It's fair game. She got what she deserved, right? I don't think so. It took 20 minutes before anyone even called 911. She died. And this slide was courtesy Janet Mock, just a couple days ago. Read those very same names, and I was inspired to do the same here today on MSNBC. So, some people say, oh, coming out as trans, that doesn't take courage. Well, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the things that we face, for people to think that this is all fun and games, for people to trivialize it, make jokes, it's really nothing to be joking about. So let's talk about courage. And again, with all the things that have been going on in the local news, or international news, I should say, it'd be hard to talk about transness, being trans, without mentioning Caitlyn Jenner, who recently won the Courage Award at the ESPYs and gave an amazing, I think, speech. And in there she said, make fun of me, I can take it. But think about the kids. So, I just anecdotally, a friend of mine shared one of the memes, the jokes that we share on social media. It was a picture of a dog, and it said Caitlyn Jenner's cat. Actually, it said Bruce Jenner's cat. They didn't even respect her identity as a woman. And I was like, really? So I decided, and I did the same thing with my brother, I wasn't going to let these jokes stand with people who call themselves my friends. And I called him out on it. And he says, well, sorry, Lana. They put themselves out there. They're on reality TV that deserve it. I'm like, no, nobody deserves that. I said, do you think my cat looks like a dog? Because when you say these things, when you think trans people are fair game and it's okay to openly joke about them, you're not just hurting them. Heck, you're not hurting them at all. They probably don't even see it. You're telling everyone around you that this is what you think of other human beings. You don't know who in your circle of influence has a loved one who's trans. One of them might be trans. They may have a trans son or daughter. They may be struggling inside with their identity, and this is the kind of thing you're putting out. He finally took it down. And I was glad. I was glad. So, on the wall of my firehouse, this picture is there. I got to read this because this was part of an article I did in 2012 for Fire 2020. And it starts this way. On the wall at my engine house hangs a large framed photo featuring the silhouette of a firefighter against vivid flames. Underneath is a caption, which is too small to see here, but underneath is a caption that reads, "Courage comes from a reserve of mind more powerful than outside circumstances." As emergency first responders, we are often lauded for our courage following some public bold event, like pulling someone out of a fire, rescuing a dog. Yet I believe the hardest courage is being brave enough to be honest with yourself. So, it takes a lot of courage to be honest with yourself. That was my first step. And beyond that, speaking in front of people, coming out on the internet, doing a video, this is scary. Coming out to the people closest to you, coming out to your children, your spouse, risking. That's everything you hold near and dear. Because folks, money and possessions, we all want to keep those kinds of things. But there's things in life that money can't buy. I am so blessed. I've always felt blessed to be an emergency first responder. And people will call me a hero or call me brave for that. And I always kind of feel funny about that because I'm like, well, they pay me for that. You get paid. And I just like, I'm trained. They give me very expensive, effective equipment. And, they pay me. But my compensation for getting to go help people when they need it the most, that's beyond. That's why there's volunteer firefighters who do it for free. What a blessing, I used to think, and I got into EMS and was riding the emergency squad, and I got to take more runs and do it more often to go help people, oftentimes on the worst day of their lives. We used to say we're in the worst day of your life business. If you meet us on the job during an emergency call, you're having a bad day, chances are, So I get paid to go help people. As I was struggling with things and the word courage came up, I found a quote by Ambrose Redmoon, who I think was a paraplegic. And he said, "Courage is not the absence of fear. Rather, it is the realization that there's something more important than that fear." So, being brave and having courage doesn't mean you're not scared. In fact, they'll say sometimes a fine line between courage and foolhardiness. So if you don't know the danger and you're not afraid of it, maybe you're not brave at all. You're maybe doing something foolish. So I've said that where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's fear, there's courage. And along with that quote I just gave about courage being the realization that there's something more important than fear, Amelia Earhart said that courage is the price that life exacts for granting peace. The soul who knows it not knows no release from little things. So I thought, wow, and I kind of put those two quotes together. So the price for having any kind of peace in your life is knowing how to face the fear in your life. Facing the fear in your life because you know that there's something more important will give you peace and give you release from little things. And I think we have a lot of people. And fear is relentless. Fear doesn't have to stop. Facing your fear and overcoming it, you think, wow, that was great. Doing great now. And you grow. I told my son, I read somewhere that fear is like a compass that points you in the direction you need to go in order to grow. And he liked it. That's the quote that he gave and stood up and said, that's what she said, my father. And well, I think that, again, trans people being fair game in people's mind. There was a lot of talk when Caitlyn Jenner received the Courage Award. A lot of people felt like it was okay to openly discuss who they thought should have gotten it or that she didn't deserve it. And my feeling on that, my take, I don't know. I've never met her. I hope to. Being on the board of GLAAD, maybe I'll get to. But one of the things that she said is that she realizes she has a very strong, huge responsibility to the community, as do I, and acknowledge her privilege, as I hope I've done adequately here, the privilege that I enjoy. I'm like here, she's like millions, internationally known, lots more resources than me, but I'm still miles above all the people who are suffering so much harassment, indignity. It's staggering. But when one of us of privilege gets the microphone, as I have here, I do want to acknowledge that I have a responsibility. I mean, I told my story because it's important that we all tell our stories, but I speak for everyone and not just me, not just my brand of trans. And similarly, when Caitlyn Jenner receives an award for courage, again, I don't speak for her, but my take on it is, in the way I viewed it, was she was up there receiving it for all of us, all trans people. She was receiving it for people, for her tremendous reach, so that people would understand the courage it takes to live your life authentically in this day and age as yourself. And people come up to me all the time, trans people, and say, Lana, you're an inspiration. I want to do what you've done. It's just too hard. I just wish it wasn't so hard. And I used to always say to them, one of my favorite movies, A League of Their Own, Tom Hanks' character, Jimmy Dugan, tells Gina Davis's character when she says that to him, this is too hard. He said, it's supposed to be hard. That's what makes it great. If it was hard, everyone would do it. Well, upon more reflection, I thought more about that, and I thought, that's true. Doing great things. The harder something is to do, the harder something is to attain, the greater the value it should be to you once you get it. Woody Hayes used to say, anything easy ain't worth a damn. But it shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't be hard to be who you are. That shouldn't be seen as a noble challenge. I mean, can't we be better than that as human beings? I mean, can't we raise our children in an environment where they're free to be the best version of themselves, free of constraints? Speaking of constraints, what's my time? Are you? Good segue, huh? 12:50. I need to wrap up, right? So let me wrap up. I wanted to speak real quickly about diversity. Got 5 minutes, and I really wish I had not gone so long, because diversity is so important to me, and I was speaking of it earlier. And racial diversity. I grew up in the 60s during the Civil Rights Movement. I remember Martin Luther King as a child. 1968, I was 8 years old. And I remember those difficult times from the perspective of a white, male perspective at the time, child. I went through busing, schools, segregation. I was hired on the Division of Fire through a federal judge's dual hiring list. And at the time, I thought, well, that's not fair. It's not fair to me. I was thinking about myself. I wasn't thinking about the community. And I thought, this takes my chances of getting hired in half. Well, I got hired, and my class was half black and half white, and we were lined up together, and we were brothers and sisters. They didn't know it yet. But we worked together. We put our lives on the line together, and I watched the Division of Fire grow over the last 3.5 decades I've been part of it. And when I first got hired, and they were doing that hiring, there was a lot of tension in a lot of places in a lot of ways. I saw a lot of bigots, older bigots, retire and go away. And I came to know, not just read it and understand it up here, I came to know it in my heart that it was the right thing to do. And I'm glad that they did it. I only wish we were keeping the numbers. Because you see, as I didn't know as such a youngster, I was only 20 when I got hired, it's not about what's fair to us as individuals. It's about what's fair to us as a community. And for emergency first responders, police and fire, we need to be thinking what's fair to the community that we serve and protect. And we need to look like the community we serve and protect. And that's vital. And I would be remiss, just south of us in Cincinnati, Samuel DuBose, the horrible tragedy down there. And we've got a problem, folks. We got to recognize it. We got to quit denying it even exists. And, so I wish I wanted to talk a little more on this, but, this to me is diversity. This is different ages, different backgrounds, different colors, and how beautiful that is. And focus on what brings us together as humans. Because I've been to Thailand, I've been to Argentina, and people at their basic level are all the same. I mean, we all cry when we get poked in the eye. We all laugh and giggle when we see a puppy or a cute baby. The cultures, language, these things are different, background, but we're all the same. We're all part of the grand picture of humanity. And I like to say, I don't know, what is it, 64 million pixels, or when we buy a television set, we want we want 1080 pixels, so we have a better picture, a more beautiful picture. Well, just think about it. If every pixel was the same color, was identical pixels, you'd have a blank screen. So we all fit together. We for the grand landscape of humanity, we have to learn to accept our differences and start treating people like we treat restaurants. We go to restaurants, we really want the diversity and the culture and experience, that we should start looking for that in each other. And so I know my time's up, so thank you very, very much for your attention.